She pointed at the door and called me a leech, in the house I paid for. Every mortgage payment, every tax bill, every repair for 15 years, and somehow I was the burden. My name is Richard Collins. I'm 68, a widower, 38 years an HVAC technician before I retired. And on that Saturday afternoon, standing in the living room I'd built with my own hands, I heard my son tell me to leave. "Dad," Ethan said, looking at the floor instead of me, "my wife and her parents come first now. If you can't accept that, maybe it's time you left." Nobody spoke. A dishwasher hummed in the kitchen. A lawnmower buzzed next door like it was any ordinary day. I looked around that room one last time. The stone fireplace I'd built after retiring, the oak shelves I'd cut and stained myself, the hardwood floor under my son's feet, every inch of it paid for with my money and my hands. "I understand," I said. No yelling, no speech, just that. Then I picked up the bag I'd already packed and walked out the front door. I hadn't always expected this. I raised Ethan believing family wasn't measured in money. That's how my own parents raised me. Working people from outside Dayton who never had much but always knew where they belonged. After my wife Linda died of breast cancer 7 years earlier, Ethan was the one who kept me going, sitting with me on the back porch, drinking coffee, listening to stories he'd already heard 100 times. Then he met Amanda, energetic, ambitious, and for a while, genuinely good for him. When they got engaged and wanted a house in a nicer Columbus suburb, the math didn't work. Student loans, wedding debt, a mortgage lender who wasn't impressed by dreams. Ethan came to me one evening, embarrassed. I didn't make him ask twice. I covered the down payment, the closing costs, and when the bank suggested keeping the title in my name until they stabilized, everyone agreed it made sense. Only temporary, Amanda had smiled. I believed her. I set up automatic payments from my retirement account and never mentioned it again. That's what family does. For a couple of years, it really was wonderful. Sunday dinners, barbecues, Christmas mornings. Then Amanda's parents, Gary and Sheila, retired nearby and started staying longer. Weekends became weeks, became drawers of their own in the guest room. Gary had an opinion about everything, the paint, the landscaping, and always said, "Your house," to Ethan, never once to me. Sheila didn't need to be rude. She just acted like I wasn't there. If I spoke, she kept talking over me. If I cooked, she ordered takeout. If I mentioned Linda, she changed the subject. The first real wound came when I found a framed photo of Linda missing from the mantel. Amanda had packed away every picture of her. Wedding photos, family portraits, all of it boxed in a closet with the Christmas decorations, because she wanted the house to feel cleaner. I carried one box to my car and cried harder that night than I had at Linda's funeral. Not because the photos moved, because someone decided her memory didn't belong in the home she helped build. After that, I became Ethan's dad to the neighbors instead of Richard. Gary gave house tours like he'd swung a hammer himself. I overheard Amanda tell a friend in the backyard that they really needed Richard to give them more privacy. Her friend asked if I even lived there. "Sort of," Amanda laughed. I went home and stared at my bank statements. Mortgage, taxes, insurance, all still coming out automatically, year after year. I almost canceled it that night. Instead, I told myself families go through rough patches, that Ethan would notice eventually. But Ethan was changing too, quietly, the way a shoreline disappears one wave at a time. If Amanda wanted Thanksgiving with her parents, that's what happened. If Gary criticized me, Ethan said nothing. Every silence felt louder than any argument. The end came over something small. Amanda wanted to turn my old garage workshop into a home gym. "I still use that space," I said. Gary chuckled that I didn't need all those old tools. Amanda folded her arms. "We need the room more than you do." I said calmly that I'd paid for that garage. That's when she snapped. "You've lived off us long enough. You're nothing but a leech." And Ethan, the boy I taught to ride a bike, whose tuition I paid, whose first home I made possible, told me to leave if I couldn't accept that his wife's family came first. I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was impossible. Then I packed my bag and drove away, and for the first time since Linda died, the house with our family name on the mailbox didn't feel like home. I pulled over, wiped my eyes, and called my attorney. Daniel Mercer had handled my will after Linda passed and the house purchase years before. He wasn't flashy, just plain spoken, which I appreciated after 38 years of fixing furnaces for people who like to use big words. "You look exhausted," he said when I walked in. "Tell me everything." I did, all of it, including my own mistakes, how I should have spoken up years earlier instead of swallowing every insult to keep the peace. Daniel already had a file ready, the warranty deed, my name only, mortgage records, every payment from my retirement account, property taxes, insurance, all me. "Legally, Richard," he said, "this has always been your house." I knew. They'd been living there because I allowed it. "What do you want to accomplish?" he asked. "I don't want revenge," I told him. "I just can't keep financing people who think I'm a burden." He laid out my options. Keep paying, ask them to leave, draw up a lease, or sell. "I want to sell," I said. Driving to the extended stay apartment I'd rented, I expected guilt. Instead, I felt calm. Not happy, not proud, just calm. Like I was finally making a decision that wasn't built on fear. Linda used to tell me, "You can't pour from an empty bucket." I finally understood what she meant. 3 days later, Ethan called, cheerful, saying Amanda's parents had surprised them with a trip to Hilton Head. He never asked where I was staying, never asked if I needed anything, never apologized. But some part of me still hoped that week away might give him time to think. Instead, social media filled in the silence. Every morning brought new photos: Amanda with a frozen drink on the beach, Gary grilling seafood, Sheila under a giant sun hat, Ethan with his arm around his wife, captions like "Finally living the life we deserve," and "Family first." 6 people at a waterfront table. Not one message asking if I was okay. I let myself feel sorry for a few minutes, then closed the app. Self-pity wasn't going to fix anything. Meanwhile, my life got busy. Daniel introduced me to a realtor, Melissa Harper, who walked the property with real respect for how well I'd kept it. I paid for cleaners, patched nail holes, trimmed the flower beds, fixed the deck railing I'd been putting off. Working alongside a handyman half my age, I found myself smiling, not because I was selling, but because for once I was building something instead of enduring it. Melissa called 4 days later, stunned. 23 showings in 24 hours, 8 offers by the weekend, 2 all cash. I didn't take the highest. I took the best, from a young couple, a school teacher and a firefighter, who'd been renting for years and wanted a place to raise kids. I read their letter 3 times, touched Linda's wedding ring on the chain around my neck, and said, "I think she'd like them." Closing was scheduled for Friday, before Ethan and Amanda got home. I drove past the old neighborhood one last time, watched kids on bikes, looked at the maple tree Linda and I planted, and said goodbye without looking back. Everything belonging to Ethan and Amanda, I want to be clear, I didn't throw anything out, had already been professionally packed into a climate-controlled storage unit I'd rented for 60 days. I wasn't trying to destroy their lives. I was ending my financial support. There's a difference. The calls started at 2:14 that Friday. "Dad, there are moving trucks in the driveway." Then more, then Amanda, then Ethan again. 12 missed calls by the time I sat by the little lake behind my apartment, watching ducks drift across the water, completely unaware that a family's whole understanding of their life was about to collapse. Daniel filled in the rest later. The new owners had barely started carrying boxes in when Ethan's SUV pulled up. Amanda marched toward the porch, sunglasses still on from vacation, and told the woman on the lawn she had the wrong address. "This is our house," the new owner said, gently. "The house was sold this morning," she added. When Amanda pushed back, Gary turned red, insisting it was their property. The firefighter husband held up paperwork. When Amanda tried the door, it was already changed. New locks, new owners, a police call, and eventually an officer telling Ethan, as calmly as anyone could, that county records showed the property had changed hands that morning. "You said your dad would never do something like this," Amanda told Ethan. He didn't answer, because he'd believed that too. That evening, Daniel called to update me. Everyone's belongings were safe in storage, accessible immediately. "I don't want them thinking I destroyed anything," I said. The missed calls kept climbing, 32, 41, 53, until finally, after sunset, Ethan left a voicemail that wasn't angry anymore, just broken. "Dad, please, I don't understand." For a long time, neither had I. Then I understood something else. He genuinely didn't know. He'd never asked who paid the mortgage, never checked the deed, never questioned why repairs happened without touching his own account. Convenience has a way of becoming invisible. I called him back. "I didn't take your home," I said. "I sold mine." Long silence. "The house was always in my name. I paid every mortgage payment, Ethan. I don't think you ever really knew." He asked where they were supposed to go. I told him I'd already paid for 60 days of storage, for the movers, for everything to be handled with care. "I wasn't trying to punish you," I said. "Then why?" "Because I finally believed you. When you told me your wife and her parents came first, I realized I didn't have a place in that house anymore." Amanda grabbed the phone, furious, accusing me of humiliating them, insisting I owed my son. "I owe my son love," I said, "not money." Then I hung up. Days later, Daniel showed me copies of every mortgage payment, 168 of them, over 14 years, never missed. I'd made a promise to Linda, in a hospital bed, to take care of our boy. Maybe I'd tried too hard. Maybe protecting him from every consequence had helped build the entitlement that eventually broke us. The first month after the sale was strangely quiet. No calls, no visits, just silence. For years, silence had scared me. It usually meant someone was upset and I needed to fix it. This time I let it sit, and I discovered it wasn't loneliness. It was room to breathe. With the proceeds finally in my account, I thought about everything that money represented. Skipped vacations, used cars, years of sacrifice Linda and I made so our son could have more. I drove north to a small town on Lake Erie, where we'd once vacationed, and found a modest 2-bedroom ranch a few blocks from the water. White siding, blue shutters, a porch swing. I paid cash. No mortgage, no debt, no complicated memories in the walls. My new neighbor Martha introduced herself with a plate of blueberry muffins before I'd finished unloading boxes. Within an hour, I'd met 3 more neighbors who didn't care what car I drove or how much money I had. I started volunteering with a nonprofit that repaired homes for elderly residents and veterans. One Saturday, we rebuilt a wheelchair ramp for a Korean War veteran named Frank, who wiped away tears and thanked me like it was the first kindness he'd been shown in years. Gratitude, I learned again, isn't loud. It's usually just a quiet sentence, sincerely meant. Through Daniel, I heard how things were going for Ethan and Amanda. A small rented apartment, a life suddenly expensive, without my mortgage payments, quietly absorbing the biggest cost. The vacation had gone on credit cards. Gary and Sheila moved back to their own condo. There wasn't room for them anymore. For the first time since Ethan's marriage, nobody else was carrying the weight. Weeks later, Ethan called, exhausted. He'd taken a second job in a warehouse. "I'm proud of you," I told him, and he sounded caught off guard, like he hadn't expected that from me. "I never realized how much everything actually cost," he admitted. Before he hung up, for the first time in years, he said, "I love you, Dad." I told him I loved him too, and sat on my porch until the sun went down. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. A month later, Daniel handed me an old manila envelope he'd found while sorting through the house records. Birthday cards, a faded photo of Ethan and me holding fish at Indian Lake, and underneath it all, folders of canceled checks and mortgage statements, each one labeled in Linda's handwriting. House for Ethan. She'd believed we were building him a foundation. Looking through it, I realized a foundation is supposed to help someone stand on their own. Instead, I'd kept carrying him. Not long after, Ethan texted asking to come see me in person. I answered with 3 words. "Whenever you're ready." He showed up looking different. Heavier in the shoulders, new lines around his eyes, work boots dusty, hands rough. Life tired, not body tired. We sat on the porch swing Linda would have loved and watched the lake for a while before he finally said, "I failed you." He admitted he'd told himself he was keeping peace in his marriage, but really, he'd just been afraid of conflict, afraid to tell Amanda or her parents they were wrong, and that staying neutral had meant leaving me to stand alone. He'd spent 2 nights going through his own copies of the mortgage records Daniel had shown me. "I never once asked whose account paid those bills," he said. "You trusted me. I took advantage of you." I told him those were 2 very different things. He asked why I never told him no. I said I think I confused helping with protecting. That somewhere after he became an adult, I kept trying to hold his hand anyway, so he never learned how heavy life actually was. because I was carrying most of it for him. That afternoon, Martha and my other neighbors stopped by, mentioning offhand how I'd fixed the porch steps, repaired Frank's ramp, was helping at the community center. Ethan looked stunned. None of them knew what had happened back in Columbus, and yet they respected me anyway. Respect usually grows from what you do today, I told him, not from what happened yesterday. Walking along the lakeshore, he told me Amanda still didn't fully understand, that she'd called it an overreaction, but that he'd told her she owed me an apology, that sacrifice isn't supposed to erase respect. Near the end of the pier, he asked if he deserved forgiveness. Forgiveness isn't the hard part, I told him. I forgave you before you got here. Trust is the hard part. It grows the way trees do. Slowly. He said he'd earn it. That evening, I opened an old cedar chest and handed him Linda's photo album. Tucked in the back was a letter she'd written in her final months, addressed to no one in particular. If our son ever forgets how deeply he's loved, remind him that love isn't measured by what people give away. It's measured by the lives they quietly build for others. Ethan couldn't finish reading it aloud. He pressed it to his chest and told me he was sorry. I stood and held him the way I had when he was a boy who'd fallen off his bike. No pride, no excuses, just a son who finally understood. 3 weeks later, Ethan called again, asking if Amanda could come with him this time. I asked, gently, if she wanted to come, or felt like she had to. I think she finally wants to, he said. Both of you are welcome, I told him. They arrived that Saturday in Ethan's ordinary sedan. No luxury, no entrance. Amanda looked different too, the armor gone. She handed me a small box wrapped in blue paper. Inside were the photographs she'd once packed away. Linda, our wedding, the maple tree, the family portrait. I told myself I was making the house look modern, she admitted, eyes filling. The truth is, I was trying to make it feel like my house. I wasn't just decorating. I was erasing her family. She told me her parents had always taught her that once you're married, everyone else comes second. And somewhere along the way, she'd twisted that into believing my family no longer mattered. She'd never asked what my quiet generosity cost me, only assumed my silence meant I didn't mind. I confused generosity with obligation, she said. Later, I took them to the community center, where Frank waved and told Ethan he had one good man for a father. Volunteers painted fences and planted flowers around us, nobody caring what anyone owned. On the drive back, Amanda admitted she never understood the kind of life I wanted, not until she lost the house. That evening on the porch, watching the sunset over the lake, she said her parents still believed I was wrong, that parents are supposed to sacrifice everything. Parents do sacrifice, I told her, just not forever. Before they left, Ethan handed me an envelope, not addressed to a bank, but to a new savings account he and Amanda had opened themselves, to buy a house one day. Paid for entirely on their own. I think you'll appreciate it a lot more, I said. I already do, he answered. Then Amanda stepped forward and hugged me. Not dramatic, not perfect, just sincere. I'm sorry, she whispered, for every cruel word, every selfish decision, for making you feel unwelcome. I told her, thank you for saying it. She said she didn't expect everything to be fixed right away. It wasn't, but we could build something better. The months after weren't magic, trust didn't return overnight, and old habits sometimes resurfaced. But now we actually talked through them instead of burying them. Sunday dinners became a tradition again, sometimes at my little house by the lake, sometimes at their apartment. 2 years later, when they finally bought a modest home of their own, they asked me to help plant a maple tree in the front yard, not because I was paying for it, but because they wanted my hands in the soil beside theirs. Kneeling there, covering the roots with fresh earth, I thought about Linda and what she'd written about love being measured by the lives we quietly build for others. She was right, but I learned something she never got the chance to write down. Love also needs boundaries. Without them, generosity slowly turns into expectation, and an expectation left unchecked becomes entitlement. A house is built with lumber. A home is built with gratitude. Money can buy the walls. Respect is what keeps a family standing.